Well, hello, lovers of freedom. Welcome to the Jacob Hornberger radio show here on the internet with a little bit of video thrown in. Nice to be here with you all. 7 to 8 p.m. every Saturday night for the indefinite future, unless we achieve freedom before long, in which case the show will be terminated at that time. It's nice to be here with you to talk about my passion in life, and I know that it's the passion of many of you, and that is freedom. And of course, when I say freedom, I'm referring to the genuine meaning of that term, the real meaning. In other words, libertarian freedom, because that's the only kind of freedom that really has any any meaning, any truth to it. So that's what we're going to be doing on this show for the next several months, every week, same time, same station. We're going to be advancing liberty, which is the same thing as advancing libertarianism. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to be talking about the fake kind of freedom, the counterfeit kind of freedom that's embraced by the statists. Of course we are, because in understanding what freedom really means, we've got to expose and critically analyze the counterfeit form of freedom, the delusionary form of freedom embraced by statists. And of course, by statists I refer to liberals and conservatives and other people who look to the state to take care of them, to regulate and monitor their activities, to spread democracy in the world through bombs and missiles and death and destruction and so forth. So we're going to be critically analyzing that kind of freedom, the counterfeit form of freedom, in the weeks ahead and the months ahead. But really what we're going to be doing in this process is advancing freedom. And that's, of course, libertarianism. Now, I've been thinking about doing this show for quite some time, just thinking, well, as I started seeing the thing is getting worse and worse and worse in this country, to the point where, this government's possibly facing the prospect of bankruptcy on the horizon, I said, it's time for me to throw myself into this battle in a little bit bigger way. And I thought, well, this is a nice opportunity at the Future of Freedom Foundation, where I've served as president from the beginning. I do a daily article, and we publish our journal Freedom Daily, and we do op-eds, and we do conferences and lectures and so forth. But with the internet, I thought, this is a chance to kind of just converse with people, just talk to them about the principles of freedom, exchange ideas and so forth. And I said, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to rig it up. I'm here in my house. I got a little studio here and got my microphone and my mixer and my laptop, and I think it's going to work out really nice, without going to the big radio stations and worry about losing advertisers for talking about, liberal and conservative statism. I'm here to be able to talk about freedom with you in times that I think are very bad, and I think they're going to get worse. I really think that the prospect of bankruptcy looms on the horizon. That's what happens when a government spends so much more than what it's bringing in. And of course, that doesn't go to the root of the problem, which we'll be discussing on this program in the weeks ahead, and that is the immorality that's associated with the welfare warfare state that Democrats and Republicans think is freedom. But that's another subject. I mean, what we're talking about right now is the bankruptcy that comes from spending more than what you're bringing in. I mean, we all know that federal spending is out of control. I mean, that's one good thing the Tea Party has done. It's caused people to focus. And this is what reality does. This is what we're going to do on this program. We're going to focus people's attention on reality. We're going to try to strip away the delusions and the myths and illusions that cloud people's minds. And that's what statism has done in this country. And we're going to cause people to face reality, get mugged by reality. And this is a government that is spending, $1.3 trillion more than what it's bringing in every year. And that's just the amount they're admitting to. I mean, we know that they lie. And so it's probably much higher than that. But even if we accept their figure, how long can that go on? How long can a government continue spending $1.3 trillion more than what it's bringing in? Now, what is this idea of bankruptcy? What is it that brings this about? Well, we can look at the situation in Greece. Now, here's a nation that is predominantly a welfare state. I mean, I'm sure they have some military expenditures, but nothing like the welfare warfare state in the United States. I mean, here we've got not only the gigantic welfare state, the dole society where people are living on the dole, but we've got the giant military empire. Well, in Greece, they only have the welfare state predominantly. This is a way of life, of course, where you've got one sector of society living at the expense of another sector of society. In other words, they're the dole recipients, the welfare recipients, and then you've got the productive people in society from which the money is taken by the government to give to the people that are on the dole. Now, this is one of this gets us to one of these delusions I was talking about. A lot of average Americans and a lot of the statists, they have this delusion in their mind that government sort of has its own money. It's sort of like Bill Gates, like really wealthy. It's got all these resources and it's got an independent stream of income like a business, and that it's just a matter of doling out its money. And so, there's fights over, well, let's give to the poor. Well, no, let's allocate, let's build bridges and roads. No, let's do this with the money. And the idea is that this is a giant source of just independent wealth, like a fountain of wealth, and all it has to do is just decide how to dole out its money. That's the delusion. Actually, the reality is that the only place government gets its money is by taking it from people in the private sector. In other words, that's what taxes are about. That if they want to give a dole to somebody over here, they've got to first find somebody who's produced wealth or is producing wealth, take a percentage of that wealth, deduct a little bit for their own salary, and then give the rest of it to the dole recipient. That's the way the welfare state works. That's the primary role of government on a domestic level. To take money from people who are producing it or who have produced it, and then deduct some for performing this service, and then give it to the dole recipient. Well, that's effectively what the Greek government was doing for decades. Now, what ends up happening is that the people in the dole sector start getting larger and larger and larger. The number of people, it starts growing. People in the productive sector sit there and say, well, why should we work for a living when we can go on the dole like those people are? So gradually you've got people getting out of the productive sector to go onto the dole sector. And then, of course, when we're talking about Social Security, and this is another area of one of those delusions, but, we'll get to that later. You've got a lot of people, reaching the age of 60, and they take the position, well, we've got a right to retire at 60, which means we have a right to go on the dole. Now, in order to get this dole, they've got to take it from the productive sector, the young people. And so all of a sudden you've got all these people getting, that are older. Large numbers are retiring. They're reaching 60. There's less people over here in the working sector to supply this dole. And so guess what happens? Well, in the beginning, you've got, the amount they're collecting equal to or greater the amount they're paying out in the dole. But then over time, the amount they're paying on the dole starts exceeding the amount they're collecting in taxes. Oh, well, now that obviously, that creates a big problem. You see, because how does the government do this? Remember, it's not Bill Gates, it's not a wealthy entity, it's not a business that's out there making money. The only place it's got to take it is through those taxes. And the taxes are not bringing in enough money to pay the people on the dole. Well, that's when they go out and say, well, what we'll do is we'll start borrowing the money. And for a long time, that's what the Greek government was doing. It was just borrowing the money, going out in the marketplace and borrowing. And they were keeping it secret. I mean, they weren't telling anybody what they were doing and hoping, of course, that nobody finds out. Well, think of it in these kind of terms. Suppose you've got your family and you've got a couple of kids, you got a spouse, and let's say that, just hypothetically speaking, that you're bringing in $50,000 annual income. Just to show you what's going on in Greece, and then to bring it back to what's going on in this country. And so you're doing fine. But things you're struggling. The amount of expenses, of home expenses, your mortgage, your food, your clothing, everything, and the cost of living is equal to your income. Well, one day you'd say, well, you know what? I know what I'm going to do. I'm a patriot. I've been listening to President Bush. I've been listening to President Obama. I've been listening to the members of Congress. And I'm a patriot, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to do my part to stimulate the economy. So you decide that you're going to go to the mall. That's what they tell you to do. If you're a patriot, you'll go stimulate the economy by spending money. But you don't have any money to spend that's left over from your income, because that's all spent on your everyday living expenses. So you get a credit card, and you go over the course of a year and you charge some $25,000. Well, okay, man, you're feeling good about yourself. You've stimulated the economy, and you figure out how to cover your minimum payments, and the second year you decide to do it again, but you've reached your credit limit on your credit card, so you just go get another credit card. And you go out and you stimulate the economy, buy clothing and electronics and games and computers, and you do that a third year, you get a new credit card. Well, you do this till your fifth year, and all of a sudden, you've run up $125,000 in debt. Now, all of a sudden, though, you can't even make that minimum payment on all the credit cards. And where does that leave you? I mean, it leaves you with the credit card companies coming after you. Now they want all their money. They've accelerated payment. The lawsuits are starting, and all you're thinking about when you go hire that lawyer is, should I declare bankruptcy? Because I can't pay my debts. I'm only making $50,000. I got $125,000. That's essentially what happened in Greece. The government went out there and borrowed so much money to fund these dole payments that, it starts to go broke. It finally gets to a point where, even though it's keeping it secret, it can't make those payments, even the interest payments on the debt. And people start figuring it out. And now, where were they borrowing this money? Well, they were borrowing it partly with bonds, just, issuing bonds in the marketplace, which is just a loan. People are loaning the government money in return for a bond. Or they were going to other European banks to borrow the money. And, of course, the banks and the lenders in the private market were saying, oh, well, this is the Greek government, it's special. It could never go broke. And, well, finally, the day of reckoning came. And the government couldn't make its payments, and people said, well, why don't you go out and tax? But that creates problems, because if you go and take all the money out of the private sector to pay off these debts, then what's left to produce the stream of income? Because people are going to say, why should I work for a living? You just took everything I owned. What's the point of working? I might as well go on the dole. And that's what happens. I mean, to get a sense, here's another example to understand how this thing works. Imagine you've got this farm animal that's sitting out, on the farm. It's a cow. The cow's really healthy. It's going strong. Got a lot of grass to eat. And all of a sudden a tick lands on it, and the tick, starts sucking blood out of this cow, and it just starts getting bigger and bigger and fatter, man. I mean, the tick is just gorging, and it's voracious. It just can't stop sucking, and it just keeps sucking and sucking, and finally one day, the cow does fine, but then one day the cow's lost so much blood that, it starts to teeter. Well, now, the tick gets nervous, because the tick knows that if the cow dies, the ticks, going to have a lot of trouble living because there's going to be no more blood to suck. So he's got to keep that cow alive in order to keep himself alive. But he can't stop himself. I mean, he's a tick. He just so voracious. He's just sucking and sucking, getting a great big fat. I mean, the tick's getting fatter and fatter until, all of a sudden the cow keels over, and so does the tick. Well, that's essentially what happened in Greece. I mean, the dole sector got so big and so voracious and gorging so much that there wasn't anything left in the private sector. If they take it, they kill the goose that's laying the golden eggs. And so then what do? Well, it was so interesting to see these Greek people when the government says, we can't keep this up, and they go out and protest. We have a right to our Social Security. We have a right to our pensions. We have a right to our free health care. But never stopping to think about the burden that this was having on the productive sector. In fact, it was ironic to see many of the young people out there protesting and angry, you can't do this. They're the ones that the money is being taken from. But a lot of them don't realize it. Why? Because they're operating under this delusion that the wealth is coming from the government. And all they think about is the government's being mean. We know it's got the money. The delusion is sort of like, in Social Security today, where you see the state is saying, there's a fund. I know there's a fund. The government's hiding that Social Security fund. I have a right to get it back. I put my money in. Well, that's the kind of delusion the Greeks were suffering under. And so, of course, the day of reckoning came. The government couldn't pay its bills. There was going to be a default. And nobody really knew what was going to happen at that time. I mean, there very well could have been a cascading effect because Portugal was weak, Italy was weak, and many other European countries were weak. The governments were weak, deeply indebted because of this welfare state way of life and the burden. I mean, you remember when the Europeans used to say, well, the welfare state works well over here. It was just a matter of time. We were saying this at the Future of Freedom Foundation 21 years ago. It cannot last. This system cannot last. It ultimately will break down. Well, of course, the Greek government got bailed out by the German government, the U.S. government. The U.S. government disguised it by contributing money to the International Monetary Fund. But that money came from you. It comes from the taxpayers. It comes from the American people. I mean, your money was taken from you. It's like a dole. It's like a welfare system. And it's given to the IMF. The IMF gives it to the Greek government. And it buys some time. Now, everybody's, singing, hunky-dory songs now that everything's fine. But everything's not fine. They've propped it up. They've stuck a little bit more air in this balloon. They've propped it up. But it's just a matter of time. And that's leading into what is going on in this country. This government is spending more than $1 trillion every year, more than what it's bringing in. This cannot last. Now, what are they going to do if they get to that day of reckoning where they're looking at a default? Because I guarantee you the Greek government and the IMF and so forth, they're not going to be there to bail out the U.S. government. I mean, there's too much. Not only is there a lot of anger and resentment and hatred for the U.S. government around the world, but a lot of people would like to see the government go broke. I mean, there's not going to be this sense of, oh, we got to help the U.S. government out. And so the government's going to be looking to the guarantors. Now, who are the guarantors on this debt? That's you. That you are the guarantors. When we talk about the national debt, remember what they used to tell us back in college, in the economics classes, all these government-supported colleges and universities, that you don't need to worry about the national debt because we owe it to ourselves. That is not true. One group of people owns bonds and another group of people doesn't. And when those bondholders, i.e. like the Chinese government, demand to be paid, and the government doesn't have the income stream to pay, the government's going to come looking for the guarantors. Now, your individual share of this debt is around $43,000. It's growing every minute. And you can go to some website, I think it's called U.S. Debt Clock and everything. You ever want to see how much your share is? Go look at it, and that's for every single person, including children. If you've got a spouse and you've got 2 children, you're on the hook for around $170,000. And, it's easy to come in and say, oh, well, I don't have to worry about this. It's a government's problem. They know all about these complicated things, and I don't need to worry about it. You can sit there and live in la-la land if you want. But if the day of reckoning comes, I will guarantee you, you're not thinking about a nice, kind, gentle government. Think the IRS. Think how gentle and nice and kind they are. This is a ruthless government. And when it comes time to facing the possibility of default, it's going to do whatever is necessary to come and collect from you, the guarantor. Now, what does that mean? Well, look what some of these third world countries did when they were facing this problem. If you think the U.S. officials didn't notice what they were doing, that again is la-la land. What they were doing is confiscating people's IRAs and their 401ks. In other words, the money they had in these retirement accounts, the government just confiscated. That's it, just nationalized it. Oh, they replaced it with bonds. I owe you this amount. But they took people's money in order to satisfy this voracious monster known as government and the welfare state. If you think the government is above doing that, you're living in la-la land. The government would easily engage in that type of activity. In fact, we saw them do it in the 1930s when, of course, the statist par excellence President Franklin Roosevelt, who was combining this strange form of fascism and socialism and mercantilism, interventionism all into one, socialism, with his New Deal programs, he all of a sudden one day just said, well, we're nationalizing gold. Now think about that for a minute, because you've heard about Latin American countries nationalizing industries, like nationalizing the oil industry, like Mobil Oil or Exxon's got a industry drilling wells in Venezuela or wherever, and all of a sudden the socialist government just says, we're taking it from you. It now belongs to us, and here's a little pittance, we're going to pay you for it. Well, that's not supposed to happen in the United States. I mean, we're supposed to be a country that enshrines private property and the principles of liberty and limited government, a republic and so forth. Well, guess what? Roosevelt did the exact same thing with the gold industry. He just nationalized gold. He just ordered Americans to turn in all their gold. Ordered them to. I mean, essentially confiscated. They had to turn it in to the government. And they paid them, but of course a devalued price, not the fair market value of the gold. Now that's incredible. I mean, we saw this in Cuba, for example. Remember when Castro comes in and he says, oh, we got to equalize wealth. It's not fair that these businessmen, the Bill Gates and so forth, have more when others have less. But instead of just taking a little bit, which is what the statists do now through the income tax and the welfare state, the dole system, Castro just carried the principle to its logical conclusion. He just took the wealthy people's industries, their businesses, their homes, and redistributed it to the poor. That's what socialism's all about, government ownership, total control, redistribution of wealth, equalization of wealth, and of course we now know what the results are. Everybody's equally poor, and well, this is what's going on. That was what was going on with Roosevelt, confiscating gold. Now, why gold? Well, there's 2 reasons. I mean, this is a kind of a fascinating part of this. And later on in programs, we're going to be discussing the monetary system of the United States, what was unique about it when it got founded, how Americans believe differently than the statists of today, the American statists of today. And, of course, I'm referring to the liberals and the Republicans. Well, statists hate gold. I mean, they absolutely hate it. Now, why do they hate it? Well, I mean, it's just a commodity. Well, they hate it for 2 reasons. Okay, one reason is because it provides a way to protect people from what government does to their money. Now, let me digress here a minute. What does that mean? Well, that brings up, the Federal Reserve System, which, as everyone knows, it's a libertarian. We advocate abolishing. I mean, this is what Ron Paul's talking about with his book, In the Fed. And this is what libertarians talk about. The Fed is the central bank. It was established in 1913 with the objective, the purported objective, of stabilizing the monetary system, so there wouldn't be any financial crises anymore. Well, this is ridiculous. I mean, within 15 years or so, the Federal Reserve had precipitated the Great Depression, the great stock market crash of '29. Now, okay, I know some of you, if any statists are listening to this, I know the statists are going to say, no, Jacob. Oh, no. We were taught in our government schools that the Great Depression was the failure of the free enterprise system, and that Franklin Roosevelt saved free enterprise with the welfare state and the regulated and managed economy. Well, this is part of the la-la land. This is part of the delusions under which Americans have been suffering. Now, we could digress again and say, well, why do Americans live under these delusions? Well, that's what government schooling is all about. I mean, there's a reason governments maintain control over their educational systems. And no, it's not so that they can learn teach a minimal standard to students. It's so that they can inculcate the right mindset. And we're going to be talking about that as part of this program in the weeks ahead, about how the statists, they have to have government in control of education in order to inculcate this mindset that people should have. And, well, part of this that's inculcated is the Great Depression is the failure of free enterprise. Well, it's delusionary. It's just simply false. It's mythical. Libertarians know it's mythical. As a matter of fact, several years ago, Ben Bernanke, who's now chairman of the Federal Reserve, he was at a dinner in honor of Milton Friedman, who had been saying for years, along with Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises and the Austrian School of Economics, they'd been saying, the libertarian economists had been saying, it was the Federal Reserve that brought down the stock market in '29. It was their monetary manipulation. And all of a sudden, Bernanke, in a rare moment of dealing with reality instead of delusion, says at this dinner, yes, Milton, you were right. And you've been right. And we won't make that mistake again. Well, at least he was dealing with reality. That the Federal Reserve, this central bank that was supposedly designed to stabilize the crises and everything, bull. They bring on the greatest crises in American history. Now, what's the real purpose of the Federal Reserve? Well, it's to enable government to spend more than what it's bringing in. I mean, that's the whole objective. That's what it's been from the very beginning. Historically, that's the purpose. Because you see, remember, there's the voracious needs of the dole recipients. And here in America, we're talking about the dole recipients and the military dole recipients, the whole military-industrial complex, all the contractors. So you've got this huge sector that's like voracious. We need our dole. We have a right to our dole. You've got this sector over here that's having a very difficult time sustaining this burden of having money taken out of their pockets. People are barely making ends meet. And so how all of a sudden is the government going to tax people not only to cover this difference, but to pay off this debt that's rapidly rising? Yeah, well, that's what they're faced with. Well, so what do they do to cover this difference? Well, they effectively, it's a complicated process, and it's intentionally made complicated so that people can't figure it out. But effectively what they do is just start printing the money. And they print the money to pay the difference. To cover the debt that they're out there borrowing, so they're going to pay the debt off with newly printed money, but then also the additional expenditures that they're making. They just print the money to pay that off. Now, what was interesting about the Greek situation is the Greeks couldn't do this. I mean, this is what governments have done throughout history. This is what the federal government, the Federal Reserve, has done since 1913. I mean, it's not a coincidence that your dollar bill is worth about 5% of what it was in 1913. Because they have flooded through the printing press so many dollars to cover decade after decade after decade of welfare, warfare, state spending. The Greek government couldn't do that. You see, because they were part of this Eurozone, and the amount of euros, of new euros that are going to get printed, is controlled by the European Commission, which really is predominated by the Germans, who have always stood for sound money. I mean, you remember the German mark? It was always solid. It is like the Swiss franc. And so the Greeks couldn't just print the money. And so that's why they're in a crack. That's why they're mugged by reality. Well, the Federal Reserve is not constrained in that sense. Man, they start printing the money. Well, it's beautiful from the standpoint of government officials, you see, because what happens is they're getting all their debts paid, and they're paying all these dole recipients without having to collect taxes. Now, what's the outcome of this? Well, the outcome is that as the dollar's debased, prices are rising. I mean, that's the way the debasement is reflected. That if the value of the dollar is dropping, the things the dollar buys are rising in price relative to the dollar. They're becoming more expensive because you've got a debased, devalued currency. In other words, you increase the supply of dollars and the value of the dollar is going to go down relative to what it buys. Now, you can see just in the last 10 years what's been going on here. Now, the leading indicator of this is this item that the statists hate. Okay? That's gold. Now, one reason, as I said, they hate it is because it gives people a way to protect the value of their money. In other words, when you buy that gold coin, what you're saying is they're going to debase the paper money. They can't print the gold. They can only print the paper. Well, the gold, you may not make a lot of money off it, but at least you're storing its value. In other words, as everything goes up, your gold is going up along with the price of automobiles and clothing and computers. So it's sort of a relative thing. You're keeping the store of value of your savings. So let's say if you got $1,000, you go out and buy a gold coin, everything else may be going up, but so is your $1,000 value. Well, that's why they hate gold. That's one of the two reasons that statists hate gold. They don't want people to store their value. They want them to be able to confiscate their wealth by putting their money in paper money or bonds or treasury bills or things that are sort of like guaranteed instruments of confiscation. Because it's easy for the government to indirectly confiscate wealth. Nobody knows what's going on when this goes. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Libertarians understand what's going on, but the average person in the street. Now, this again gets us back to public schooling, government schooling. I guarantee you they're not going to teach this in those social studies or economics classes in high school or middle school. It's just not going to happen because they don't want people to know this. They've got to go from the first grade to the 12th grade, inculcating in people's mind that inflation is sort of like the flu. We've been struck by inflation again. Oh my gosh, America, how unlucky. It's like the flu. The flu has struck us this year. So did inflation. Oh wow, prices are rising. Oh, greed has returned to America. Look at the greedy people, the store owners, the gasoline store owners, the commodity sellers. Oh, they're all greedy people. Well, that's what the average person thinks. He sees prices rising, so he lashes out at the people raising the prices. He doesn't recognize that what's really happening is the paper money is that's dropping in value. And so what does he do? Price controls, do something about the price gougers, do something about the greed. Because the last thing he's going to do is focus on the root cause of the problem, and that's the federal government. This people can protect themselves from this by storing their gold. This is what Roosevelt wanted to prevent. He knew he was going to go on a spending binge. He knew he was implementing the welfare state. He knew that military expenditures were going to go up, and he wanted to just separate the American people from their ability to protect themselves from what was going to come. And it came, decade after decade after decade. Massive government spending, massive debt, and over time, the debasement of the dollar. Now, what's amazing about this thing is that the American people just nonchalantly went along with it. I mean, just like little sheep. The Cuban people did too, but you'd think the American people would have been different. They just surrendered their gold. Not everybody surrendered, but those that didn't surrender they were looking at a felony conviction. Yeah, a felony. I mean, not a little misdemeanor traffic ticket sort of thing. If you got caught with a gold coin in your home safe or in your bank deposit box or in your pocket or whatever, they would indict you. A federal grand jury would issue an indictment. You'd have to hire a lawyer, and they would convict you because you didn't have a defense. I mean, there you are with your gold coin, and you go to the federal penitentiary. Now, the real horror of this is that we're not just talking about private property here. I mean, you know, let's say they make computers illegal or whatever, you know, lamp bulbs illegal, and they make it a felony offense. Okay, that's a piece of private property. This was more than this. Now, we tend to think today as gold coins as just being, you know, private property. They were much more than that. This was the official money of the American people for more than 100 years. This is the monetary system that the American people set up, where people used gold and silver coins, copper coins, as their money, not paper. Not these Federal Reserve notes. Nothing promising to pay money as notes do. No, it was gold and silver coins and copper coins because they knew. Americans knew what governments do when they're on a paper money standard. They knew what central banks did. I mean, that's why they didn't have a central bank for most of the first 100 years of American history, more than 100 years, till 1913. And so here, Roosevelt and the Congress make it a felony to own something that had been the official money for more than 100 years. I mean, it's incredible. And it stayed a felony all the way up to the 1970s, where the collective memory of the American people of gold as money had just evaporated. You know, by the time the 70s came along and you know, they finally persuaded Congress, oh, please, you know, legalize gold again, people had lost that sense that this was the real money. This is what the country was founded on. Not this debased Federal Reserve note irredeemable paper money system where they debase and depreciate, you know, decade after decade. So this is why Roosevelt did. This is why statists do it. They don't want people to store their value. But there's another thing going on here, and that's the fact that gold is a signal. You know, it's a signal that something's not right. And when you see the price of gold soaring, the average guy on the street, even he knows instinctively that something's not right. Now, he may not understand what's going on, but when he hears that gold is soaring, there's something about it in the psyche that everybody knows, uh-oh, something's not going on. I mean, you know, something's not right. And now, obviously, you know, gold can soar for other reasons. I mean, you can have the supply of gold contract for whatever reason. You can have the demand for gold go up. You know, people want jewelry and so forth. So you could have a spike in the price of gold. But the other thing that can happen is that money is flooding into the market, which is causing the depreciation of the money, which is reflected in an increased gold price. Now, if you look at gold since, let's say, 9/11, I mean, I think it was around $250 an ounce. Today, I mean, it was soaring last week. It's like almost $1,400 an ounce. Imagine that. In less than 10 years, something goes from $250 an ounce to $1,400. Now, along with that, everything else is rising. I mean, if you fill your car up with gasoline, you know what's going on with the commodity market. And that's usually where the reflection is first starting. Then it starts filtering out into the other parts of the economy where prices start rising, and this is the way they confiscate people's wealth. The amount of money you're making, your fixed assets and stuff are worth less. But that gold going up, that's a signal that something's bad's happening. And clearly something bad's happening. I mean, the Fed is now, the floodgates are open. The Fed is flooding the market with this paper-based currency. They're expanding the credit market. They're filling up the balloon again, okay? I mean, they propped up this whole system over decade after decade. This is what we've been saying at the Future of Freedom Foundation. 21 years we've been saying this welfare state way of life, this warfare state way of life, it's distorting things, it's perverting things. It's a house, a car, just a balloon, whatever metaphor you want to use. But it cannot last because ultimately reality comes into play. The markets realize that this is not playing out the way it's supposed to be playing. It's all artificial. It's all government induced, and then the crash happens. And so that's what we're doing. I mean, look everywhere you look in the economy today. It's in crisis, but there's a common denominator here. And what's that common denominator? It's the federal government. I mean, you look at Social Security. I mean, it's busted. It's just busted. There's no fund, and yeah, okay, and this we're going to be dealing with. This is one of the big delusions we got to deal with. Where, gosh, it's just amazing. Where people are they've convinced themselves that there's a secret fund in there. I put it in. I've been putting it in for 40 years, and I got a right to get it back. Because in their mind, the federal government's got this little room where there's a fund there where all their money's gone. No, that's not reality. That's delusion. The money is taken from the productive sector. Remember what I was saying? The government has only one way to get its money to give to the dole recipients. You're taking it from the young people, many of whom are having a horribly difficult time getting started in life. I read the other day where 80% of college graduates go home to live with their parents. Why? They can't afford it. And they got these horribly burdensome taxes, and the baby boomers are now retiring, and you got this huge system, no fund, and they can't fund it. Then you got Medicare and Medicaid. That's a disaster. The conservatives say, oh, all we got to do is repeal Obamacare. That's nonsense. Because if you repeal Obamacare, you're still faced with the crisis produced by Medicare and Medicaid, which conservatives love. And so how does that solve the problem? All you're going to do is get another variation of Obamacare or Bush care or something else to deal with the crisis associated with Medicare and Medicaid. It goes on and on with the welfare state. The dollar is cratering. I mean, compare it like to the Swiss franc. I mean, it's like boom. You've got the war on drugs. I mean. Well, could you ever find a bigger mess than the war on drugs, a bigger disaster? I noticed for today, I read in the paper where they just killed a drug lord in Mexico, and they're celebrating. Oh, well, we've killed this drug lord more. And the paper always says, this is the New York Times, a major dent in the drug war. Give me a break. I've been hearing this for 35 years, where they've been busting drug lords for 35 years, and they do the same thing they have with the record drug bust. They call the press in, and the press says, oh, a major dent in the drug war. And, you know how many people have died in Mexico in the last 4 or 5 years? 30,000? Not because of drugs, because of the drug war. And then, of course, I don't need to tell anybody the mess in foreign policy. I mean, Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, it's a total disaster. They've killed hundreds of thousands of people. And for what? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And how do you explain it? And you know what the real... Here's, you got more delusions. Now, we're going to be talking about foreign policy in the weeks ahead, but here's a big delusion. I mean, where we've brought freedom to Iraq, and Afghanistan too. I mean, we brought freedom here. The freedom now exists in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, that's scary. That conservatives and liberals honestly believe this. I mean, that's scary. Because here you got societies where the troops are running the country, effectively. They have the right to barge down people's doors, search, seize them, cart people away to jail with no warrants, no hearings, no grand jury indictments, just hold them as long as you want. They're shutting down the press. It's critical of the government. I mean... It is your absolute nightmare of military... You know what they've done in Iraq? I mean, they've substituted one tyrannical regime for another. I mean, they say, oh, we got rid of Saddam. They honestly believe this regime is different. I mean, it's torturing people, it's abusing people, it's killing people that resist the regime. That's what Saddam was doing, killing people who resist the regime. It's a total disaster. Their museums are sacked and ransacked. It's what Donald Rumsfeld said, oh, well, this is just the messy part of freedom. You see, that's what they think is freedom. Now, that's scary enough. That's their delusion. But you know what's even scarier? What's even scarier is that since they believe that's freedom, is the prospect that they're going to bring that kind of freedom here to America. And this is what we libertarians have to stop. I mean, we've got to stop these statists. Now, some of you may be saying, well, Jacob, why do you keep lumping liberals in with conservatives? Conservatives are like freedom-oriented. And why are you talking about conservatives this way? And I got an email the other day that said, conservatives are our first cousins to libertarians. That we agree on so much, and you shouldn't say these things about them because they're going to get offended. They're not going to join up with us libertarians. What? I mean, was he kidding? I mean, give me a break. Conservatives are statists to the core. They're as statist as liberals are, if not more so. I mean, if you take foreign policy and the empire and the death and destruction and all the military bases and everything, the conservatives are much more statist than the liberals are. But you see, there's not a dime's worth of difference between them philosophically. Look, they believe, number one, that the role of government is to take care of people. You know, that's what their freedom is. Remember at the start of the show when I said, you know, different forms of freedom, the counterfeit form of freedom? That's what I'm talking about. Is that liberals and conservatives believe that freedom is government taking care of you. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, agricultural subsidies, bank bailouts, food stamps, public housing, foreign aid, whatever. That government's role is to take care of people. That's their concept of freedom. And then you've got this drug war where people are jailed for ingesting the wrong substances. I mean, hey, hello, that's what they call freedom. You know, that's their concept of freedom, is putting people in jail who are sitting in the privacy of their own home ingesting substances that they don't like. Now, of course, you know, it doesn't matter if they ingest alcohol or cigarettes, but, oh, if you don't approve it, we're going to put you in jail. And that's their concept of freedom. And then, of course, you've got the imperialist concept of freedom. I mean, you talk about delusion. I mean, like Department of Defense. I stand for a strong national defense. Defense is when somebody attacks you and you defend. Now, we're sitting with 700 to 1,000 military bases all over the world in more than, 130 countries. And, I mean, they're everywhere. Europe, Korea, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America. And they call that defense? I mean, this is delusionary. This is empire in its purest form. And this is what they call freedom. This is what they call a republic. I mean, a guy posted on our Facebook page at the Future of Freedom Foundation the other day that, we've got to support the troops on Veterans Day because they're dying we're fighting for our freedoms here in our republic. I mean, see, this is part of the delusion, that public school generated delusion, that this is a republic. This hasn't been a republic in 50, 60, 70 years, maybe more. It's been an empire. Now, we'll go into that. And again, that's what I said. Part of this program is going to be exposing these things. Now, the Tea Party's, they've done a good service. I mean, they've talked about out of control federal spending. They've talked about debt. They're looking at the Constitution. They're looking at the Declaration of Independence. We're going to be talking about these founding documents in the weeks ahead. But the problem with the Tea Party is they just haven't arrived yet. I mean, they're still in this statist box of liberals and Republicans. They still believe in Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, in the concept of government taking care of people. They're not ready to abolish these programs. And in foreign policy, I mean, they believe in these occupations and this, and they think that there's freedom in Iraq, and they talk about the Constitution, all right? But what about no declaration of war on either Iraq or Afghanistan? I mean, that's clear. There's no declaration of war. We know that. That's a fact. And the Constitution requires a congressional declaration of war before the president can wage war. Where is the Tea Party? I mean, they're concerned about the Constitution. They want the Constitution to be followed. Have any of them said, you know what, these wars are illegal under our form of government? I don't think so. They favor the wars. Now, I'm not being critical. I'm simply being observatory. But because I think it's a positive that people are asking questions and they're challenging the establishment. They're establishing the conformity mindset, the regimentation that people are inculcated in with the government school system, which we'll talk about in the future. I mean, that's good. When people are asking questions and they're challenging things, then we libertarians have a shot. And that's when we've got to just keep putting our ideas out in the marketplace. Now, there's no guarantee that we're going to succeed, but there's no guarantees in life. But one thing's for sure. If we libertarians don't put our ideas out there of the free market and the morality of freedom and why people should be free to live their lives the way they choose and why there should be no central bank and no paper money and so forth, if we don't do that, then there's no chance. I mean, the only hope for this country is with the libertarians. We are the hope of trying to get this country to change course before it's too late. And before things get really, really bad. Because, I mean, we could have a perfect storm where there's crises in the dollar and Social Security, Iraq, Afghanistan, China, military, whatever. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, let me talk a little bit about this show. I mean, this is the first time we're doing. I'm doing this in my home. Got my little studio set up. And I'm calling it the Freedom Oasis. Okay, now you say, well, Jacob, how'd you come up with that name? Well, let me tell you how I came up with the name. I was trying to figure out, how can I tell people what this show is going to be about? Because this isn't your standard talk show. We're not going to be dealing with sports score. Oh, by the way, we're going to be taking calls, too, because I got a little phone mixer here, and I'm not going to do it tonight, but, over the course in the future, we'll take some calls here. So, we exchange ideas. I'm going to learn from you. You learn from me. We're going to have fun here. And so I started thinking, how can I tell people what this show is going to be about? Because we're not going to be talking about movies or what's happening in Hollywood and what the sports scores are. This is a show exclusively devoted to freedom. And I said, okay, here's the way to think about it. Imagine that you're out on the Sahara Desert. And, man, you're just dying of thirst. You're trudging along. You haven't drunk water in 3 days. You're out of food. And the end's near. I mean, there's no hope. And the buzzards are circling you, the vultures, and they're dropping down every, 10 feet every hour, and they're like 20 feet over your head. And you're just trudging along, hoping just that you'll hit civilization. But, you think the end's near. Well, all of a sudden, though, on the horizon, you see this palm tree. And you think, oh, whoa. But then, of course, you think, oh, well, I've heard about mirages, and they taught me about mirages in school, and it's probably a mirage. But you figure you got nothing to lose, so you start trudging up there. And you get up to it, and the closer you get, man, you think, oh my gosh. Well, you finally get up to it, and boy, there it is, the palm tree. It's real. And better yet, there's well with a pail of water, and you got dates coming on. Oh, 2 palm trees with a hammock in between, yeah, and dates, so you know that civilization's coming. You know somebody's going to come and save you. But you figure you got an hour. You got an hour, and so before anybody comes, and man, so you lie down in your hammock, you get those dates, you get a little pail of water, and man, you just lie back and you say, okay, I'm here in this oasis. That's what this hour is for. This is your freedom oasis, okay? Now, I know what your life's like. I mean, I may not know you personally, but I know what your life's like. You're besieged by statism. I mean, all week long, you got statists around you, bureaucrats, DEA, FBI, Border Patrol, Postal Service, whatever, I mean, you're besieged, polluted. It's like soot, all the statism in your life. Okay, well, you come here to the Freedom Oasis, and you just kind of like, oh man, you just breathe unadulterated, pure freedom air, and that's what this program's going to be. Because those of you that know the Future of Freedom Foundation, come on over and visit us at fff.org. Drop me some emails. Tell me how you like the show and what you want to hear, and you'll see that that's where you breathe pure freedom air on the internet. Well, that's what this show's going to be about. And so why'd I have it on a Saturday night? Because I don't want y'all all tensed up, I want it to be a relaxing time, like get ready for the show. Send your kids up to their room, buy them a pizza, close the door, give them a video game, and then come down in the den and turn on the internet, man, and you got 1 hour in the Freedom Oasis. I mean, this is just pure liberty here. And but it's not just going to be fluff, that's not what I'm interested in. This is my objective, For many years, I've fantasized about maybe, like teaching a course, college-level course in Libertarianism 101. And I figured, wow, why not, do that with this radio show? Because, darn sure I'm never going to be teaching a college course on libertarianism. They're never going to do that. And so I thought, wow, I can do this educationally. Now, I don't want you guys to freak out. Oh, no, of course, term papers, final exams. No. It's not going to be anything like that. It's going to be fun. But at the end of a year of this show, what I'd like, my objective is that everybody gets a deeper understanding of freedom, and myself included. Because when it comes to liberty, I consider myself a student of liberty. But at the end of this year, I figure, well, if people can say, you know what, I understand liberty better as a result of having heard this show. I understand what libertarianism is all about. I understand why you guys believe in economic liberty and educational liberty, and understand why this leads to a prosperous, harmonious, moral society. Then I will have accomplished my goal. So in other words, we're going to do some thinking. But I don't want you guys to freak out. Martha wants us to think. Oh, my God, no. I don't want to think on a weekend. Well, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be a pleasurable kind of thinking, and we're going to have fun thinking. I mean, it's the type of thing that, when they say, when the statists say, we're going to raise the minimum wage law to help the poor. Well, you're going to be able to say after a year of this, of saying, hey, that's just nonsense. That's delusionary. You don't help the poor with a minimum wage law. You hurt the poor. Well, but in order to do that, you got to be thinking. Okay? You got to be thinking. So that's what we're going to be doing in this show. We're going to be thinking, but we're going to be enjoying it. We're going to be having fun. We're going to have some guests from time to time to banter back and forth about freedom, and we're going to be talking about current events. We're going to be like looking at the newspaper, because what's fun about being a libertarian is that what we're about saving the world. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, we're not trying to save the world. We're trying to change the world. Well, I guess we're trying to save ourselves and in the process save the world from the statism under which we're suffering. But it's fun being a libertarian because you can read the paper and you can watch the news and watch the programs on television through a libertarian perspective, and you get joy out of it. Even though you may not be changing the world, it's fun to watch the status. And then here's an example. Now, I've talked about conservatives, but let me harp on liberals a little bit. I saw this the other day in the New York Times. Y'all probably familiar with Bob Herbert. He's one of the liberals in this country. Now, liberals pride themselves, they're for freedom and all this, and they really are, but in this delusionary sense of freedom, this counterfeit form of freedom. He's talking about the United States being at war, in Iraq and Afghanistan and everything, and he's calling the Tea Party crackpots, of course, because the Tea Party's out there talking about out-of-control federal spending, which funds the liberal agenda, all the welfare state and so forth. But here's what this guy says. He believes in equality and so forth. He says, I would bring back the draft in a heartbeat. Then you wouldn't have these wars last a lifetime. So, in other words, he's complaining about this perpetual war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and how it's just going on for 10 years in both places, and he's really lamenting that. But instead of just saying, look, what libertarians say, bring the troops home immediately, dismantle this huge empire, bring all the troops home from everywhere. Germany, World War II's over, Korea's World War II's over. Bring them all home and discharge them. Get them into the private sector, the way Castro's now doing. He's laid off 500,000 people off his statist system. And no, that's not what this liberal says, Bob Herbert. He's going to bring back the draft. Now, you know what the draft is? The draft is a way that forces people to serve somebody else. I mean, it's the essence of slavery. And this is what this liberal is calling for. The idea of taking a person from his family, probably women too, because they believe in equality here, a young woman, taking her away from her family and forcing her to die in one of these ridiculous imperialist wars. Well, this is why we libertarians are so important. We've got to stop these statists. And can we? Well, of course we can. That's what our job is to continue advancing our philosophy. And we just got to keep finding the people that say, gosh, I really like people like us. I'm a libertarian. Where you guys been? And of course our response is, where you been, man? So anyway, that wraps up the hour. I want to tell you guys, thank you very much for listening, for watching. I've greatly enjoyed this first show. I hope you come back. Hope you tell your friends, and I'm going to try to have the phone hooked up next time, and we'll do a little bantering back and forth then. So thank you so much, and come and visit us at the Future of Freedom Foundation's website, fff.org. Drop me an email. Great to be with you all tonight. Have a nice rest of the weekend. I'll see you next week, 8 o'clock, 7 to 8 o'clock Eastern Time, same station. Bye-bye.